Premier League have deducted Nottingham Forest 4 points for breaking the profit and sustainability rules. Again, like the Everton situation earlier on in the season, I think it is absolutely ridiculous. Now, before I go into this, please hit the like, the subscribe, the bell button. We're going to be doing a lot more videos, a lot of non-Bournemouth related content as well, covering the whole of the Premier League, the whole of football. Because let's be honest, football is a bit of a mess at the moment. But of course, yesterday, Nottingham Forest found out their fate that they were deducted 4 points. Now, some people will see this as a mild punishment. Compared to the Everton 10 points, it quite well is. But I didn't agree with that either. I didn't agree with how it was managed and also how they're being punished and not other clubs. So let's look. I'll tell you what. Let's get to the problem, the main problem in the Premier League at the moment, and that main problem is Manchester City and Chelsea. Now the thing is, they are two of what you would call the top six clubs. Now the problem is with those two clubs, they've got a lot of money. They've probably got the best lawyers. Um, they've also got the most charges. In Chelsea's case, they've been building contracts over a prolonged period of time, which, to be perfectly honest, I don't agree with. And I don't think that is, a sporting way to do things. Also, it's dangerous from the club's perspective because if those players don't turn out to be quality, of the required quality to push Chelsea forwards, they are stuck with those players. And the thing is who in their right mind, regardless of the Premier League or not, is going to go and buy out a player who is already on, a packet a week. Let's be honest, they're on large contracts for a prolonged period of time. Nobody's going to do it. And if that player turns out to be a dud, and we'll come on to Nottingham Forest, and I will mention one particular player which Nottingham Forest have probably found has been a bit of a dud for them. Was quite a legend here at AFC Bournemouth, helping us get through the leagues, but he hasn't performed for them and they've been stuck with him for a long period of time. But Chelsea, if you imagine, that's a lot worse. 8 years. 8 years over an 8 year period. Now, the reason why they've done this is to spread the transfer fee over a longer period of time. That loophole has kind of been closed by the Premier League, but the rule still applies. Should it really have happened? And why are we talking about Everton and Nottingham Forest, two of the other 14, being punished and not Chelsea? Let's look at the elephant in the room, so to speak. Manchester City. Now, Manchester City have got all these charges. Now, I appreciate to go through that many charges is going to take a long period of time. However, you cannot punish Nottingham Forest and you cannot punish Everton when you have got somebody who has got about 110 charges against them. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. Now, the other big thing as well. So let's go on to Nottingham Forest and you know what they've been done for. So I'll give you some statistics here. So Everton were deducted 6 points. Remember, it was reduced from 10. Now, originally, Everton was actually deducted the 10 points because of a breach of 19.5 million. Now, Forest have been deducted the 4 points for a breach of 34.5 million. So there's quite a bit of difference. You would say that Nottingham Forest would get the higher punishment. Again, before Forest fans do, disappear from this street, please don't, because I don't agree with your points deduction. I honestly don't. Now, the reason And I've watched a number of videos and digested everything. One of the main reasons is that Forest were actually deducted, more points than Everton. So they were deducted 6 points initially. Now, hear this out, because I think this is bizarre and I think this is actually ridiculous. But they've had 2 points given back to them, which has made the four because they've abided with this investigation. So they have cooperated. Um, and, so all clubs should do with the authorities. Everton was supposedly deducted 5 points. An extra point was added on top because they didn't abide by the rules. Now don't shoot me if I've got this wrong, because there is so much conflicting information, as I said in my video with regards to the EFL deal the other day. I was absolutely livid initially. Now the problem is a lot has come out since, which kind of gives conflicting information, to what was initially given. So we are just getting snippets. We're getting snippets of Sky Sports, Talksport. We're getting the media, the Daily Mail, the Sun, the Guardian. All these places are reporting, and sometimes some of the information just slightly gets twisted. The Premier League, have come out with the 4 points for Forest and the 6 points for Everton. Now, I don't get and I don't agree with this points thing, because remember, they deducted Everton 10 points. They deducted Everton 10 points. And I believe there is still going to be a hearing with regards to Everton, and they could be deducted more. So I cannot make head and tail of really what is going on here. It feels like the Premier League is making it up as they go along. What does this mean, though, for the rest of the league? Because let's go back to, Forest and, long term contracts quickly. Because, of course, Nottingham Forest signed Harry Arter, and he, believe it or not, is still on the books at Nottingham Forest. He was on loan at Notts County last season. He's been playing in the under 21 side. Now, Harry is, a hard-working player. He's a legend at AFC Bournemouth. I've got so much time for him. No, not knocking him at all. But he has not been a success at Nottingham Forest. They signed him on a 4-year deal on quite high wages. Now, that is Nottingham Forest's fault. But like I say, with regards to the Chelsea situation, that is even worse. That's more, concerning from a football fan perspective, but also the league. How does that stop, a club like Chelsea buying a big name player and putting them on a long term contract? It doesn't. Luckily, the loophole has been filled. Let's go back to the original point, because I've got to be honest. I think that the Premier League are making it up as they go along. Richard Masters, I've already said what I think about Richard Masters. I think he should resign. He should resign, or he should be fired from his position, because at the end of the day, he has not done what the Premier League. Yeah, the league's in disrepute. You shouldn't have a league with stars next to clubs' names. There's Forest that's been deducted 4 points. There's Everton that's been deducted 6. This is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. Who's next? Now, I'm not going to say who's told me this information, because I think it's unfair on them, and they probably won't give me further information again. If I say their name, and effectively tell you who they are. But secondly, you know, one of the main concern things is I am aware that this football club was sailing, AFC Bournemouth was sailing close to the wind on the front of PSR, which I've referred to it as financial fair play quite a few times. But we sailed close to the wind, and the only reason why we haven't been drawn into all this mess is because David Brooks went to Southampton on loan. Now, I was dead against that. I was dead against that. But that is what I have been told. Now, why am I even coming out with that? Well, there's a reason I'm coming out with that, because of Nottingham Forest's statement. And I've got to say, you know, and I have got no preference between Everton, Nottingham Forest, whoever here. But I'm going to say this now. This is an excellent statement, an absolutely fantastic statement, which really does, explain the problems with the league. Now, it says Nottingham Forest is extremely disappointed with the decision of the Commission to impose a sanction on the club of 4 points to be applied with immediate effect. Notwithstanding our disappointment, we thank the Commission for agreeing to deal with this matter on an expedited basis. The club considers it to be essential for the integrity of the league to have charges resolved in the season in which they are issued. Let me just cut in there. That's a very, very good statement. Now, what is that actually saying from Nottingham Forest? Now, the Everton situation, should it have been dealt with last season? Potentially, some may say. Some may say it would have relegated Everton, but at the same time, is that what they're hinting at? I think Nottingham Forest are hinting at something a little bit more than that, actually. And I'll tell you what they're hinting at: the Manchester City situation, the Chelsea situation. Why should Nottingham Forest be punished when Manchester City and Chelsea are getting away scot free? I don't think they should be. Now it continues. We were extremely dismayed by the tone and content of the Premier League submission before the Commission. Now, after months of engagement with the Premier League and exceptional cooperation throughout, this was unexpected and has harmed the trust and confidence we had in the Premier League. That the Premier League sought a sanction of 8 points as a starting point was utterly disproportionate when compared to the 9 points that their own rules prescribe for insolvency. I completely agree. Completely agree with that. We were also surprised that the Premier League gave no consideration at all to the unique circumstances of the club and its mitigation. In circumstances where this approach is followed by a future PSR commission, it would make extremely difficult, if not impossible, for newly promoted clubs without parachute payments to compete, thus undermining the integrity and competitiveness of the Premier League. This is the biggest point of the lot. The Premier League is broken. Football is broken. Now, Nottingham Forest, do remember, were promoted to the Premier League with a team of loan players, effectively. They did very, very well. There is no rules against you being promoted to the Premier League with loan players, with players that maybe can't make the step up, with older players. Now, if Nottingham Forest continued in that vein and went into the Premier League without spending the money they did, they would have, without a shadow of a doubt, been relegated and relegated badly. But, and to full credit of their ownership, they made the call that they needed to sign these players. Now, we made a joke about it, but it's not really a joke anymore, because this club are getting deducted these 4 points, which I think is grossly unfair. Now, there is, a big thing that I feel that PSR is positioned to protect the top six. Now, what do I mean by that? Now, no club like Newcastle, like ourselves, can spend, from a wealthy owner to get to that level. Manchester City have done it just before the curve. Now the problem is they've done it just before the curve, and now nobody else can compete with that. It's effectively a closed shop. Manchester United will always be in that top six clubs. Main reason being, and likewise Liverpool, because they are a bigger club traditionally. Fair enough. That's not a problem. You know, a a club should be able to wash its own face. However, this is the huge thing. You can't compete with them because, even if a club, say for example, Bournemouth, Bill Foley built a 45,000 seater stadium and we filled it every week. Now, I know it sounds ridiculous. Go with it. Just go with it. But he built that stadium. We filled it every week. We become successful. We spent money. We could not compete regardless. You know, the only way I can imagine clubs competing in the future, and this might be the way the Premier League is trying to aim it, but we are going now from a league which is, you know, recognized and celebrated around the world to something which is effectively a basket case. And this is all down to Richard Masters. And this is why Richard Masters needs to resign from his position with immediate effect. The money is not going to be coming in soon because you can imagine around the world, people will lose interest. It's clubs like Everton, like Nottingham Forest, like AFC Bournemouth, playing against these big sides that does make the money. The Super League, you know, to be honest, I couldn't care less about the Champions League, you know, and what's going to be happening to it next season because I think it's all become about money. I think the new rules of the Champions League are ridiculous in themselves, let alone a Super League. People around the world watch the Premier League for the sole reason of clubs like Nottingham Forest, Everton, Bournemouth pulling off surprises. You go back further, Swansea City, Wigan, Reading, Derby. You go all these clubs. Sorry to mention Derby, Nottingham Forest fans, if you're watching, but at the end of the day, it's why people watch English football, British football, watch the Premier League. Why people, watch the Championship. The Championship is the sixth biggest supported league in the world because there's that excitement of a club like Nottingham Forest, like Bournemouth, getting to the Premier League. You know, let's take for example, pick any club. I tell you what, let's pick Rotherham United. Rotherham United, have an outstanding season. Outstanding season. They loan a couple of players from here or there, from other championship sides, and they win promotion to the Premier League. Now, imagine this, they haven't, but Rotherham United have got a wealthy chairman. They haven't got a Premier League squad. They have to spend money. Should they be subject to these PSR rules? I don't think they should. Likewise, I don't think Nottingham Forest should. I think the only way you could actually look at this is that there should be maybe an advance on, payments from the Premier League, or a view that, a club promoted to the Premier League can spend future monies. Points deductions, I hate them, absolutely hate them, because it's just ruined the integrity of the Premier League. Results and final table should be based on where teams finish, not because they've been deducted 4 points here and 6 points there. No, not at all. Not at all. It should all be based on where they have finished in the table, how they've done on the pitch. If they get relegated, it should be based on where they are, in how they've performed on the pitch. You know, I've got to be honest, I quite like Luton Town. I love their story. It echoes our story, but they should not be staying up if they are not one of the 17 strongest teams in the league. If they finish in the bottom three, they should be relegated. That's by the by. And again, points deduction shouldn't work. Now, what I would suggest is maybe transfer embargoes. Now, transfer embargoes would probably be the best way to go. The Everton situation probably would have been able to steady it out a little bit more. Nottingham Forest could probably steady it out a little bit more. With other clubs in the future, if we are subject to it, a transfer embargo for 1 or 2 windows, it steadies it out. So that's the way it should be, but no way points deductions. And it goes on. Well, one of the big reasons, I'll let you read this statement yourself. It's on the Forest website, but one of the big things is the Brennan Johnson deal. Now, I watched Simon Jordan, and on Talksport, and I disagree with what he actually said here. Forest had a deal in place to sell Brennan Johnson to Brentford. Now they declined that deal, and a couple of months later, they sold him to Tottenham Hotspur for 15 million more. Now, if they had sold him to Brentford at that time, they'd avoided this potentially. Potentially, I think there still would have been a little bit of a shortfall, looking at the maths, but they would have avoided the main crux of it. But they held on and they got more money for him by selling him to Spurs. No way should a club be stopped from doing sensible business like that because of these rules. Especially a club that's just been promoted to the Premier League, especially a club that had to spend because they were under equipped to make themselves competitive in the league. They had to do that. They had to do that. With clubs having multi-club models and things like that nowadays, you've got to also look at that sense of things. I think the future, and how clubs are going to be able to compete and, from the get go is by having decent academies. Now, what this does is this also rules out a number of clubs, like the Rotherhams. What if there's a marvelous story? Again, another marvelous story, and it can't take place because they've you know they've been stopped spending, whereas Manchester United, they can spend millions upon millions upon millions upon millions. Rotherham United might not be able to spend much at all because they're a new club, they're a small club, they get smaller attendances. you know with ourselves, smaller attendances, it's just wrong. And to hit Everton and Nottingham Forest when you're not in hitting Manchester City and Chelsea, and what other clubs, are involved in this. You know, if we have broken it, then, by all means, we should be involved in it. But I'm sure, if we're involved in it, there is probably most of the other 14 involved in it as well. Um, so I think, personally, it's it's a ridiculous, ridiculous, ridiculous situation. The Premier League is a mess. It needs to be sorted. They need to get their house in order. The Premier League status as the number one league in the world is going down the pan at this moment in time, and it's a real shame. It's a real shame, especially after what we watched the other day, at Dean Court, being 3-0 down against Luton Town, a side battling for their lives, doing everything they can, and then coming back and winning 4-3. That's what football's about. That's what football's about. That's what an advert for the Premier League is. Not Everton being deducted 6 points and potentially more. Not Forest getting deducted 4 points. Not Manchester City sitting on hundreds of charges. Not Chelsea putting players on long term contracts. What's important to football is the competitiveness, the surprises, the Leicester stories. The Premier League's a mess, and Richard Masters needs to be, either A, fired, or B, resigned. Otherwise, the Premier League won't be top of the table for much longer. And like I say, that would be a real shame, and it would have undone a lot of good work. I don't agree with these points deductions. I think Everton should get their 6 points back. I think Forest should get their 4 points back. I believe in transfer embargoes. I believe that we should have an independent regulator in football to manage situations like we see at Reading, at Wigan, at Derby, all these clubs, at Rochdale, you go even further, Scunthorpe, all these clubs. We need an independent regulator to stop that sort of thing. Also need an independent regulator to manage expenditure at clubs. But we need that independent regulator to do that whilst not stopping teams being competitive, like Nottingham Forest, like Bournemouth, like Everton, like West Ham. The Premier League is becoming two leagues. You've got the top six, you've got the big six. Not even Newcastle can break into that because they're being restricted now, however much money the Saudis have got. And then you've got the other 14. And the other 14 aren't going to break into that because they're not allowed to. They're being restricted, and football is going down the pan. Not only VAR, which I've had my say about before, but the whole of football is going down the pan. Like I say, like, subscribe, leave a comment. If you're ever an Everton fan, if you're a Forest fan, let me know your thoughts. And like I say, hopefully, fingers crossed, justice will prevail and you get the points back. Unfortunately, it's unlikely because what Richard Masters has put in place, you know, um, which he's just as, to be honest, Rick Parry's just as useless in the EFL. Look at the situation at Reading. That's an absolute, complete and utter joke. What's happening there? But the Rick Parry just keeps hitting them with points deductions. You know, Forest can appeal within 7 days, but they can't provide any new evidence, so they can just argue their case. Um, which which case I think it'd just be a waste of money, and Richard Masters will stay firm, and the new panel of 3 people, whatever it is, will stay firm. Football's a mess. Football's a mess. We need to sort it out. The Premier League needs to get itself back. That's my thoughts. Leave me your thoughts, and hopefully football can recover because it's on a slippery slope, and football is dying. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you in the next video here at the Cherries in all departments.